I heard it first at my mother's funeral. 4 words, 4 bullets. We don't have a daughter. My father said it without hesitation. His voice didn't tremble. His eyes didn't flinch. He stood by the casket, flanked by my younger brother and his perfect wife, while guests circled like moths around old power. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't even invited. But I came anyway. Not to mourn, not even for closure. I came to see if he still had a face to show the world after everything he'd buried. And when I stepped forward, in black and silence, every head turned. His didn't. He looked straight ahead, then whispered to the man next to him loud enough for everyone to hear, "We don't have a daughter." Just like that. I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. That line, he'd rehearsed it for years, perfected it, polished it until it gleamed like the family crest above our fireplace. He used to say it in private, behind closed doors. Now he said it in public, in front of the same people who once kissed my forehead and called me the Carter girl. I was Evelyn Carter, the firstborn, top of my class, too outspoken, too smart for his liking. My crime, I stood up for my mother. I still remember the night it all broke. I was 16. The house was colder than usual, and not just because the storm had cut the power. I came down the hallway to the sound of porcelain shattering, and then her voice, tight, shaking, pleading. I saw him grab her by the wrist. Not the first time, but the first I couldn't unsee. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I took out my phone and recorded exactly 13 seconds of the truth. The next morning, I told her, "We can leave. I'll help. We'll be okay." She smiled through a bruise and said, "Sweetheart, it's complicated." But she saved the recording. I know she did. And my father, he knew she had it. A year later, she filed for legal separation. And everything exploded. He called her unstable. He pulled strings with the family doctor to have her declared mentally unfit. He had her signature removed from bank accounts, property deeds, even the will. And when I refused to back him, when I gave a copy of the recording to her lawyer, he turned on me too. Not with fists. Worse, he made me disappear. He revoked my college trust fund. He changed the locks. He called my school and said I'd withdrawn voluntarily. Then he sat me down, poured himself a glass of scotch, and said, "From this moment forward, you are no longer a Carter." I was 19. No money, no backup, no family. Just the truth, and a name I refused to erase. I left with nothing but a duffel bag, a cheap phone, and a printed copy of that 13-second clip. I slept on a friend's couch for 2 months. Took 3 part-time jobs, enrolled in a state college under a different last name. I studied law, because if I couldn't win by being loud, I'd win by knowing every weapon he ever used. Back at the funeral, people stared like I'd risen from the grave. Some pitied me, some feared me, but no one stopped me, not even when I approached the casket, not even when I placed my hand on the wood and whispered, "I'm sorry it took me this long to come back." "Mom." Behind me, I heard him scoff. And that's when I turned. For the first time in years, I faced him. He still looked like the man in my nightmares. Pressed suit, cold eyes, but smaller, somehow. He didn't recognize the woman I'd become. Good. I didn't respond to his words, didn't argue, didn't beg. I walked out of that funeral with my spine straight and my jaw clenched. Because I wasn't there to fight. I was there to mark the beginning. Later that night, I opened the envelope I'd kept for 9 years. Inside it was a single sheet of paper, my original birth certificate, unedited, unaltered. And on it, clear as day, was his name. Father Charles Gregory Carter. Mother Margaret Louise Carter. Child Evelyn Grace Carter. He could deny me in public. He could pretend I never existed. But this document, it was the one truth he could never rewrite. And soon, it would be the only thing standing between him and the fall of everything he built. Because what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd spent the last 3 years preparing something bigger. I wasn't just Evelyn. I was the legal strategist behind the firm reviewing his company's biggest merger to date, and he was going to need my signature to finalize the deal. But not yet. Let him bask. Let him drink and gloat and pretend he's untouchable. Let him believe he buried the past. Because the next time we meet, I won't be the girl he erased. I'll be the woman holding the one paper he fears most. And this time he'll be the one without a name. I never stopped hearing it. We don't have a daughter. Not just in his voice anymore. It echoed in paperwork, in silence, in every birthday that passed without a call, in every form I filled out where emergency contacts stayed blank. But the truth is, he didn't cut me off out of shame. He did it out of fear. Because I had something no one else in our family did, a memory. And the courage to name it. Growing up, I was the echo of my mother's intelligence and my father's worst nightmare. I questioned things, I read the fine print, I didn't stay in my lane. That's why he hated me. Not because I failed him, but because I saw through him. And once I stopped being afraid of him, his entire foundation cracked. He was the kind of man who hid behind legacy. The Carter name carried weight, in real estate, in courtrooms, in exclusive clubs where people shook hands with the same blood they married into. He taught my younger brother, Lucas, to inherit it. But me, he taught me to disappear. After he disowned me, the world shrank. No money, no home, and worst of all, no witnesses. People who once smiled at me in banquets now avoided eye contact in grocery aisles. My aunts whispered about me like I was a cautionary tale. She sided with her mother. Now look at her. You don't cross Charles Carter and stay in the will. But I didn't want the will. I wanted justice. And justice, real justice, requires patience. So I vanished, not from life, from their radar. I changed my last name. I took out student loans, waitressed at night, slept 3 hours a day, studied harder than I ever had in my life. Every class in family law, I devoured. Every lecture on power of attorney, guardianship, probate fraud I memorized. I knew what he did to my mother wasn't just immoral, it was illegal. But I also knew I couldn't win in a courtroom built by men like him. So I studied longer, learned their playbook, watched how legacy protected men like my father, and how silence protected their wives. And then one day, halfway through my 3rd year of law school, something happened. A man in a charcoal suit approached me after class. He said he worked for a boutique firm specializing in estate disputes and mergers. They'd heard of me. He handed me a card, said, "We like people who've survived the system they now study." I took the job. And 3 years later, I was leading a confidential review on a company acquisition, the company Carter and Wallace Holdings, my father's empire. He didn't know. How could he, to him? I didn't exist. I was just a ghost with a law degree. But he had no idea I was the one reviewing the due diligence report, the very report that required unanimous consent from all legal descendants. He thought he'd erased me from every file. But he forgot the most powerful rule in family law. If you don't terminate parental rights through court, the bloodline still counts. And my birth certificate's still active, still legal, still binding. I kept it quiet, didn't speak a word to anyone at the firm, didn't reveal my connection. I just worked, silently, methodically, for weeks. I sat in boardrooms with people who once clinked glasses at our Christmas parties. No one recognized me. I wore my silence like armor. Then came the day I saw his signature on the preliminary agreement. Slanted, proud, the kind of signature that says, "I still win." He hadn't changed. Still the same man who chose reputation over truth. Still the same man who forged documents to silence my mother. Still the man who called her unstable while drinking scotch behind closed doors. And speaking of my mother, let's talk about her, the woman he broke piece by piece. She died a prisoner in her own house. Denied the right to speak in court, silenced by a medical note that he paid for, and a judge who owed him favors. But you know what she never lost? Her mind. Even in the end, she remembered my name. She'd send me letters in secret, tucked into library books from our old town. She'd write Evelyn, "Don't let the world teach you to be small. Even fire needs oxygen. Keep breathing. I still have every one of them." And now, I was the fire, quiet, controlled, burning in the walls of his empire. He thought he'd built an untouchable dynasty, but in truth, he built it on stolen signatures and the silence of women too polite to scream. Not me. I didn't scream. I documented. I archived. I studied his tactics so precisely that now 10 years later I could predict his every move. And when the firm requested final verification from all biological descendants, I offered to handle it myself. The partner looked confused. "You sure they've already submitted a list?" I nodded. "Their list is incomplete." And that was it. The moment the fuse was lit, in 4 days, I'd stand in front of my father for the first time since he disowned me. But this time, I wouldn't be the girl he shamed. I'd be the woman with the authority to collapse his deal. And I wouldn't need a lawyer. I was the lawyer. There's a power in being forgotten, homie. In being underestimated, in being written off, because they never see you coming. They never imagine the daughter they erased will become the final name on the contract. And they never guess that the one paper they fear most isn't a lawsuit, isn't a will, isn't even a subpoena. It's a simple sheet of paper, signed, stamped, and still carrying the name he tried so hard to erase. The morning of the meeting, I didn't feel fear, not rage, not even anxiety. I felt precision, like a surgeon before a delicate operation, like a composer about to conduct a final symphony, because this wasn't just a board meeting. It was a reckoning, and I wasn't here to fight for my place. I was here to reveal I never left. The elevator ride to the 47th floor was silent. My reflection stared back at me in the brushed steel, hair tied back, no jewelry, black suit, no pin, no crest, no signs of the Carter name. But every inch of me screamed I remember everything. The boardroom door opened with a soft click. 12 people sat around the long glass table. And at the head, Charles Gregory Carter, my father. He didn't recognize me at first. Not really. Maybe he saw the cheekbones. The way I stood with one shoulder slightly angled, just like my mother used to. But no, he didn't know. He looked right at me, and then right through me. You must be the firm's liaison. Good, let's get this over with. He said it like I was invisible, like I was a technician bringing coffee. And I let him believe it, just long enough. We're just missing one signature, I said, sliding a folder across the table. The lawyer beside him, gray suit, wet forehead, flipped it open. Inside a simple form, authorization of final family consent for the merger. Wait, the lawyer said, voice faltering. This name, Evelyn Grace Carter. My father's fingers froze. I watched his throat move once, twice. That's a mistake. I smiled, gently, professionally. No, it's not. I placed the second sheet on the table. The paper he feared most. My original birth certificate. Stamped, sealed, untouched. This is still valid, never legally amended, which means I am, by law, a direct heir and decision-making party in any family-related transaction. The room fell into a void of silence. All eyes turned to him. He looked pale, small, exactly the way he used to make her feel. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. This is absurd. That girl is standing right in front of you. I didn't raise my voice, didn't break eye contact. I just let the weight of my presence do what years of screaming never could. He opened his mouth to object, then saw the letterhead on the second document in my file. The firm, his firm, the one now partially owned by the group I represented. He realized too late I wasn't here as his daughter. I was the final stakeholder. He stood up, slow and stiff, as if gravity suddenly remembered him. Why now, he rasped. Because you needed something, I said, babe, and I've waited 10 years for you to need me. That silence, that thick, brutal silence. It was the sound of a kingdom cracking. Lucas, my brother, finally spoke. You can't do this. This is family. I turned to him. Calm. Family. I sat outside Mom's hospital room while you signed a form that barred her from making her own medical decisions. You told everyone she was mentally unfit, but she still wrote letters. I pulled one from my bag, a worn envelope, handwritten. I didn't read it aloud. I didn't need to. Just placing it on the table was enough. It was her voice, and it haunted the walls he built. She wanted out, I said. You kept her in. She wanted help. I gave it, and you erased me for it. But no matter how many documents you altered, how many people you paid to rewrite the truth, I tapped the birth certificate with one finger. This stayed intact. The man beside my father, the CEO of the acquiring firm, cleared his throat. Charles, unless you resolve this legally, we cannot move forward. Her name is valid, and your merger requires her consent. And that was it. Not a shout, not a scene, just business. He sat down, defeated. I stood up. You have 48 hours to revise the agreement. After that, I file a motion to pause the merger due to unresolved familial obstruction and submit formal evidence of coerced conservatorship in the case of Margaret Carter. That got him. He looked up, eyes wide, wet. You wouldn't. I already did. I left the room in silence. I didn't need applause, or vengeance, or revenge porn for the soul. I needed something else, a clean line, a severed cord. And walking out of that boardroom, I realized I wasn't carrying my pain anymore. I was handing it back. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, no champagne, no victory playlist, just me and her letters. There were 27, all dated from the last 2 years of her life, all hidden in borrowed books from our old town library, each one a whisper from the woman they tried to erase. You were never loud, Evie, but your silence always held truth like a sword. I never got to say goodbye, but today I didn't have to, because I didn't just expose a man, I ended a dynasty built on silence. And tomorrow, I'd start building something else. The next 48 hours passed like a funeral, not of a person, of a legacy. While the rest of the city chased deadlines and cocktail hours, inside that glass tower, my father's world hemorrhaged behind closed doors. And all it took was one name, mine. It wasn't just about the merger anymore. The lawyers had started whispering about ethics probes. One of the partners from his own firm quietly pulled out. I heard they shredded entire cabinets of documents by noon the next day. But me, I didn't show up. I didn't gloat. I let silence do what decades of power couldn't strip a king of his illusion. At 9:12 a.m. the next morning, I received an email from the acquisition firm. Subject line, formal reconciliation request. Carter merger. Stalled. It was attached with a note, personally signed by the CEO. We understand the importance of family. If you are willing to meet, we'd like to propose terms that honor your position. I didn't answer. Not yet, because I had one more stop to make. There was a courthouse on West 43rd Street, small, discreet, rarely on the news. That morning, I filed 2 motions, one for legal injunction on the merger, the other, a petition to unseal the medical conservatorship of Margaret Louise Carter, my mother. You see, I hadn't forgotten what they did to her, how they silenced her, declared her unfit, used a falsified psych eval to strip away her voice, her rights, her freedom. All orchestrated by my father, signed off by a family doctor, filed by a lawyer who conveniently disappeared to Argentina 2 years later. But I had copies, I had timelines, I had everything. People like my father forget something critical. Truth doesn't decay, it waits. And that truth was now sitting in a file on the judge's desk. Under my signature, once unsealed, it would expose medical fraud, coercion, financial manipulation, and conservatorship abuse. And the man behind it wouldn't be Charles Carter, beloved patriarch and visionary. He'd be Charles Carter, respondent. The press hadn't picked up the scent yet, but they would. And when they did, the Carter name wouldn't be on magazine covers or foundation plaques. It would be on court transcripts. I waited until evening before I responded to the merger team. My reply was 3 sentences: I'm open to a conversation. But this isn't about compensation. It's about correction. Sent. No signature flourish. No warm regards. Just my name, Evelyn Grace Carter. The next day, we met in a private office suite, not a boardroom, not a courtroom, neutral territory. They brought in outside counsel. I brought 2 items, my mother's last letter, and the psych file she never got to read. I laid them on the table. Before we talk numbers, I want you to know exactly who you're dealing with. They read in silence, eyes shifting, brows creased. The senior negotiator looked up and said, "This changes everything." I nodded. It should. And then came the offer. They proposed a new clause, a philanthropic arm of the merged company, named after my mother, 1 seat on the board reserved for a female legal advisor nominated by me, and the final condition, full recognition of Evelyn Grace Carter as legal heir and family member in all historical records and filings. I didn't flinch. Make it binding. Make it public, or there's no deal. They agreed. The next day, headlines began to spread like ink in water. Carter merger delayed amid family dispute. Heir steps forward with new claims. Former patriarch named in conservatorship review. My father didn't make a statement. He didn't appear in public. He canceled every meeting for the week, but I knew where he would be. 3 days later, I stood at the top of a hill overlooking Ridgewood Cemetery. It was quiet, damp, the kind of stillness that makes your breath feel loud. And there he was, standing in front of my mother's grave, alone. No suit, no watch, just him and his silence. I approached. He didn't turn. I stood beside him, still. Nothing. Then, after a long moment, he spoke. She didn't want this. Evelyn. His voice was lower than I remembered. Tired, cracked. I answered softly. She didn't want a lot of things, Dad, but she deserved to be heard. He turned then, and for the first time, I didn't see the man who ruined us. I saw the man who lost. Not just the company, not the legacy. He'd lost me. You win, he said, barely above a whisper. I shook my head. There was never a game. You told the world you didn't have a daughter, but I never stopped being one. He closed his eyes, then did something I never expected. He reached into his coat and pulled out the letter. Her letter. The last one. She left this for you. I kept it. He handed it to me, trembling. I took it, opened it, and read Evie. If he ever gives you this, it means he's no longer the man I feared. It means you've finally become the woman I always knew you'd be. I folded the letter. Tears threatened but didn't fall. Not here. Not now. I looked at him one last time. Goodbye, Dad. He didn't stop me, didn't beg, didn't apologize, because some things break too far to mend. As I walked away, I felt something shift. Not in him. In me. The weight was gone. And in its place, freedom. Not the kind you scream about, the kind you walk into, quietly, with your head high and your past behind you. 6 weeks after I walked away from my father's grave, the Carter name no longer meant what it once did. It wasn't whispered in reverence at gala tables. It wasn't carved into polished marble outside boardrooms. It was questioned. It was scrutinized. It was finally honest. The merger went through, but not as planned. The revised charter now carried a new name, Margaret Grace Initiative, a foundation embedded in the new company's structure, designed to support women trapped in conservatorship abuse. The irony, it would be funded by the very empire that once caged my mother. The first public announcement included a full-page legal addendum. It began with the line, "We acknowledge the legal and rightful heir, Evelyn Grace Carter," and beneath it my signature, alone. No cosigns. No approval needed. It didn't undo the past, but it rewrote the ending. I didn't return to the Carter estate. It had been emptied, the furniture sold, the artwork auctioned off to pay for a flurry of legal settlements. My father's firm couldn't bury this time. Lucas moved to Atlanta. No goodbye. No apology. He didn't need to say it. I saw it in the way his name was left off the new company board, in the silence that followed. Some bloodlines don't break. They quietly vanish. As for my father, he resigned from public life. The last I heard, he bought a small cabin 2 states away. No staff, no press, no noise, just time. And perhaps for the first time in his life, consequences. But this story, it was never about him. It was about what I chose to carry, and what I finally decided to put down. 1 month after the merger, I stood in front of a red brick building in Queens. It was old, worn, forgotten, just like the women who'd once lived there. Women like my mother, like the ones I'd represented, like the ones I still saw in every hallway of law school. That day, I signed a new deed, the Margaret Grace Center, a space for women to find legal protection, therapy, housing, and above all, voice, the kind of voice my mother never got to keep. I didn't plaster my name across it. There were no gold letters, no photo ops, just quiet rooms, warm light, legal aid printed in 7 languages, and a simple plaque on the front door built by someone they tried to silence. People ask me if I ever forgave him, and I tell them I didn't need to, because forgiveness isn't something you owe someone who erased you. It's something you give yourself so you can stop carrying their weight. I set it down. I let it rot where it belongs, and I walked forward. One night, I returned to the old library in our hometown, the same one where my mother used to leave me letters, hidden inside borrowed books. The librarian recognized me. "You look just like her," she whispered, eyes soft. I smiled, didn't cry, just asked to borrow 1 book, Law and Daughters, the same title I first found her note in years ago. Inside, to my shock, was 1 last envelope, yellowed, torn, her handwriting. How I didn't ask. I opened it. There was some... Evie, if you're reading this, it means you became who I always knew you'd be. Not perfect, not painless, but powerful. Keep your fire. But don't forget, even fire rests. Once it's lit the way. I sat on the library steps for a long time, just breathing, not thinking. Because there are moments too quiet for thought, only feeling. They thought they'd erased me, my voice, my future, my name, but what they never understood is that you can't erase someone who wrote their own story, and mine. It started with silence, but it ends with voice. I walk through the halls of the center now and hear stories far louder than mine. And I know that's the real win. Not money, not revenge, not even vindication. Legacy. Built from pain, built from truth, built from fire. So if you ever find yourself holding a paper they told you didn't matter, a birth certificate, a name, a letter, remember that paper may not be loud, but it holds power. The kind that doesn't scream, the kind that ends empires. And if they ever say we don't have a daughter, just smile and hand them the one thing they can't destroy, yourself.